I think you might enjoy this one if you're a Bloodborne fan. Cheers to the publisher for the review copy and to the developer who I know will be watching this video. Does Morbid the Lords of Ire strive to be a better game than the first? Or would Ire have been better off sticking with that one? Well, my name is Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. For those unfamiliar with the first Morbid release, that was a top-down action RPG with the Souls-like flavour, in which you play as Striver after she's defeated the 7 acolytes, and in turn the Gahar gods that had possessed them, well, unfortunately, they come back. Although I wouldn't say the story is particularly innovative or exciting, it's delivered by one of my favourite voice actors.
Blinded by his arrogance, Councillor Bucky overthrew the Senate of Dunghaven.
The guy that voiced your internal monologue in Disco Elysium. Here he voices, I believe, all of the characters, maybe bar one. And for me personally, he just carries it along. His voice work is always outstanding. Now I've mentioned similarities to Bloodborne, so let's go over the gameplay. Your playtime is going to be split between 2 areas. The hub area being the Hall of Redemption, and this is where any characters that you meet during your adventure, well, they may come and join you, fulfilling a number of different roles. One of those you discover halfway through him having his legs devoured. And then when you return to the halls, he's right there waiting for you, ready to infuse your weapons with various different runes that you'll find around the world. The person sending you out on the quests is a rather rotund professor. He'll also give you quest rewards when you return. And as you probably know by now, those quests involve going to various different lands, one of 5, and defeating the acolytes and hideous abominations that fill them. The first of those is a charming little place called Rimehold. This frozen tundra is a nice introduction to the world, and it's where the Bloodborne comparisons first take hold. For example, as you enter the world, you can move freely around. It gives you a brief tutorial, but it does that thing where you gradually progress into an area, only to unlock a shortcut that leads right back to the start. To do that though, you've first got to get there, and trying to stop you are going to be the various denizens of this world. Enemies come in all shapes and sizes, starting out from sad little skeletons that can barely swing a stick, to cannon-wielding giants, and even syringe-wielding automatons. Some enemies will do damage to each other, which can be quite useful, as you lock onto them and perform an array of light and heavy attacks. Throughout Morbid, you'll find various weapons hidden all over the place. They're grouped into different categories like single-handed, dual-wield, and each carry their own pros and cons. Some will be very fast, but barely make an impact on the enemy, while others will be huge and slow, sending them reeling with each hit. When in combat, you're balancing a few elements. You have your stamina bar up here, and the enemy's poise, which is shown below their health. The aim is to knock that down to a point where they'll drop down on a knee, and with your secondary attack, you can do way more damage in an unblockable move. You can block all attacks without needing a shield, but that will impact your stamina. You can also perform a perfect parry by blocking at just the right time to create an opening, or you can hold block down and try and riposte by using the R button. All of those things require very specific timing, but will allow you to do huge damage within an open window. To cap it all off though is your pistol, and this in and of itself has a really cool mechanic. Now this is very useful in a pinch. Not only will it stagger multiple enemies with a shot, it's very often your get out of jail card, as it can quickly be brought up and fired, usually faster than you'd be able to perform any other melee attack. There were countless occasions where it saved me, sending the enemy staggering, and I could once again finish them off. The kicker here is that it's recharged by the souls of slain foes. It's like the Souls-like equivalent of some of the systems we've seen put in place with modern reiterations of games like Doom, where you do your melee attack to recharge your ammo, and it creates a perpetual flow. Here you do a few physical attacks, whip out the pistol, kill an enemy, which then recharges your pistol, and you can quickly move on to the next. When you get a good chain going, that gun can be a real game changer. Now, although it only carries a single bullet, you can actually find some dotted around the world and then use those to manually replenish your ammunition. To aid you in more tricky fights, you can also apply several different coatings, such as lightning or fire, and there's also the perfectly viable option of trying to be more stealthy. You can sneak around, even performing a little Breath of the Wild hop to move a bit more quickly while still staying undercover, and then get up behind enemies and perform a backstab or a butt stab. as the case may be. You can equip 2 weapons at any time, and although some of the heavier ones do much more damage, some of the lighter ones are actually far better at breaking down the enemy's poise, so having this quick switch with the press of a D-pad button was a nice choice. Now I did briefly mention runes. You can infuse those weapons with different runes, and these add a positive and negative trait to them. It might increase the speed while reducing your agility. The kicker here is that you can then infuse these runes into your weapons to permanently buff them at a slightly lower rate, which you can do 3 times. Later on in the game, you unlock a new character that will then let you level your weapon even further with a more powerful artifact. To do that though, you've got to go out and collect a certain item. It's really good actually. It adds quite a bit of strategy because you've only got so many runes to use, and even by the midway point in the game, you'll have so many different weapons to potentially apply them to. I also noted that certain weapons are particularly effective against specific enemies. These automatons, they were a nightmare with my heavy 2-handed axe, but when I found this little number, it was cutting through them like a knife through butter. Now enemy AI isn't the best, I will say. Some are able to follow you relentlessly across the map, while others are quite easily lost. I think there's a potential this was by design, and I actually quite like the fact I could escape, take a breather and go back into the fray. And you'll also find locked in areas where red mist will rise up on each side, allowing you, well, essentially no escape, and you have to defeat the enemies before you can progress. The shrines that you find dotted around the world allow you to save, meditate, to restore your health files, and also transport back to the hub area if needed. Now you can't talk about any Souls-like without addressing death. When you die here, you don't have to go back to your body to collect any souls. And also, if you've defeated one of those checkpoints mentioned, even if you do return to a shrine, that area will be clear when you move through it. Other than that, all enemies are restored, standard fare. There's also one final system, and that relates to your character's sanity. There's a bar located up here. Put it this way, when it's high, the world's all good, and when it's low from taking damage, you gradually go insane. That means a couple of things. Firstly, you're going to do more damage. Secondly, the world is going to start to look quite unusual, and enemies themselves will be performing more damage and attacks on you. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, sometimes when you slay enemies when you're insane, you'll then have to fight their spirits. Although they're much weaker in terms of health, they actually do far more damage than the base enemy, so stay insane for me was the order of the day. Sounds like a good life lesson. If you were a better player than me though, you can actually use that insanity to your benefit, taking vials of liquid to make you insane in a boss fight for example, so that you can be much stronger. When it comes to negatives, I think my biggest one here will be related to some of the artificial intelligence, some enemies getting themselves stuck behind edges, a little jank when it comes to the animations of some of those, and also a couple of difficulty spikes, placing checkpoints behind locked in areas that were very tricky. Having said that, they were easy enough to overcome with a little bit of perseverance. But for me, I was chatting to someone in the comments yesterday on our video that we did, and I felt the same way very much. I don't think there's been a Soulsborne game that I haven't actually enjoyed on some level. These core mechanics, I just find them enjoyable, and here there's enough new to keep it interesting while being a little safe at times. I give gameplay 17 out of 20. The controls are fine, clicking sticks in to sprint, another to lock on, light and heavy attacks with the bumpers, it's all very standard, but scenery can obscure the camera sometimes, and I did manage to get stuck once. They score 16 out of 20. Morbid is targeting 30 frames per second on the Switch. It maintains it for most of the time, but it does fluctuate occasionally. Also, this is very much the Switch version. No, it does not look as good as any other platform. Yes, you will see some quite low resolution textures, and I do hope they do a little bit of patchwork when it comes to the overall visual, things like the character's hair, which I know from seeing the developers' comments on our last video was kind of the only choice they had by the end. But those elements can look a little rough around the edges. On the flip side of that, I think the level designs and the artistic direction are really good. The enemy designs are solid, although again, the character models are quite low res. You'll notice it on some of those boss fights. This again, I think is mainly due to texture resolution. One bigger issue that there are with the visuals are some white artifacts that appear when you move the camera quickly. It's something I've seen time and time again on Switch, almost like the game can't quite render fast enough. Thankfully, I've only seen this happening during the hub area, so another little bug for them to squash. It's a fun one to play in handheld for sure, and it has a really nice orchestral soundtrack. with, as I mentioned before, the excellent voice work. Right now, I think visuals and performance would score 13 out of 20. Once they've fixed up those few little bits, that's likely to come up. With the great soundtrack, the crunchy weapons, and the good narration, sound and audio scores 19 out of 20. Morbid, the Lords of Ire will set you back £24.99 or your regional equivalent. It's a free gigabyte download and there is a physical available as well. Despite being a little rough around the edges in a few places, I have really enjoyed the game. It's very much up my alley and I think fans of the genre will enjoy it. As far as game length goes, well, it really depends on what kind of player you are. I think you could finish this one in around 10 to 15 hours, so it's definitely longer than the first game. It's definitely one of the more forgiving Souls-likes I've played, but there are lots of different secrets and unique weapons to go looking for to add a couple of extra hours to the experience. Value scores 16 out of 20. Overall then, Morbid Lords of Ire could have been a little more polished, but it's a decent game and it gets a SwitchUp score of 81%. Let me know in the comments, is this one you've had your eye on? Are you a fan of this genre or do you absolutely hate them? And as always, just a big thanks to all of you that do seem to enjoy the content. Thank you to our Patreons, our members. We've had a new member actually yesterday, so thanks to that guy. As always, for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys!